I was going to fight for Jesus. I was going to work with inner city kids. I was going to be a ghetto minister. And pretty much that's what that was 15. That's pretty much what I've been up until about 6 months ago.
Okay, so here we go. That's how you got in. How did you get out?
Well,
what went awry from that early experience of being in this group, being zealously committed to evangelism, to social justice, to helping the poor, reaching other boys and girls for the kingdom? What changed, and why did it change?
It started about 15 minutes after I became a Christian. It started like right there in Camden. People are homeless, people are hungry, kids are dealing with abuse issues. I mean, I saw more that first summer than I had seen in my entire life, and it was overwhelming to me. And I remember in that first summer sort of going, I didn't know this was going on, but God did. And at that time, I had an image of God's sovereignty that said that God could do basically whatever he wanted. Like if he wanted to change the weather, he could. And so I'm thinking, there's no way that God doesn't know this is happening. So what's wrong with God? Like either he's sovereign and he's mean, or he's as loving as I've been led to believe, and he's not actually in control of everything that goes on in the world. And I mean, it wasn't even 1 year into my Christian faith when I decided that God's sovereignty didn't extend all over the world, that he wasn't in charge. Well, that's a pretty major theological shift. I remember becoming friends with a young woman who I was trying to get to help us out in the program. And she said, Bart, I really appreciate what you guys are doing in the neighborhood. But she said, I would never be a Christian. And she told me a story about being gang raped and being jumped by 4 older men who dragged her into an abandoned house. She stumbled home, and the next day she ended up in church and asking her Sunday school teacher, where was God? Why didn't God protect me? And her Sunday school teacher said, oh, honey, God is sovereign. He could have stopped that if he wanted to. He must have allowed this to happen for a reason. There must be a lesson in it for you somewhere. So we have to figure out is how God can use this in your life. And she said, that was it for me.
Well, of course, you and I, and you know that...
I know you don't believe that.
And not only don't I believe it, but anybody that says that something horrible like that happened is the will of God is obviously so far off base. I mean, I hear that constantly. Do you know what I mean?
Because that's what many, if not most Christians
Terrible
believe.
things happen and they say, God is in control. I want to affirm.
It's all part of God's plan.
Yeah. Go through the Bible. We use the word omnipotence. It's only used once in the entire scripture.
Hey, all I'm saying is...
I think we need to make a point. It needs to be made here. And namely, that it appears in the book of Revelation once, when God's will is done and the kingdom is established and all things are as they should be, that's when God is omnipotent. But between now and then, he has given up his power for a very important reason. You cannot exercise power and love at the same time. The more you love, the less power you have. I mean, love makes you vulnerable. And we've got a God who, according to the 2nd chapter of Philippians, emptied himself of power in order to express his love to the world.
You're in big trouble. You're in big trouble, because that's exactly what happened to me in Camden. We prayed when somebody was sick that God would heal them from their cold. When somebody was getting married, we prayed that God would give them good weather on the day of their wedding. So we believed that God was in control and
everything.
He could do stuff.
Yeah, he is in control of everything. So no matter what happened, God's hand was in it, and we have to look for the reason why God did this.
So when you show up in Camden and you meet a girl in that situation, when you see that kind of poverty, if I'd have never gone to Camden, if I'd have stayed in the suburbs, I might not have had to make that move.
But you do have to say, it was that church you went to and that youth group that gave you that idea that God is in control. You never learned that from me.
No, I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying,
Thank you.
I'm just saying that's what so what happens is you show up believing in God, a certain kind of God, a God who acts, a God who intervenes.
Yeah.
I show up in the neighborhood, I see this stuff, and so the first thing I do is I go like, you know what? That theology ain't gonna work for me. So I adjust it. And that was the beginning of me being a universalist. of me believing that God was going to save her, even though she didn't believe in him. That God's grace had to extend farther than just those who accept him.
And you know how I worked that. I mean, I was a very famous universalist within the church. I wrote articles about universalism and got in trouble, and people said, he's a heretic. And they thought I was trying to mess with their faith. I was just trying to hold on to my own.